If you were born between 1957 and 1977, you've spent your entire life feeling invisible. The generation that history forgot. Too young to be boomers, too old to be millennials. Carl Jung predicted your arrival decades before you were born, and he knew exactly what you were here to do. You're not the middle children of history. You are the carriers of a soul task that is about to activate. And if you don't understand this now, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering why you've always felt so fundamentally different from everyone around you. Let me tell you something that's going to hit you hard. Your childhood wasn't an accident. The latchkey kid phenomenon, the divorce epidemic, the parents who were never home. This wasn't random social change. According to Jung's theories on collective unconscious patterns, your generation was being forged in a very specific fire. You came home to empty houses. You raised yourselves. You learned that asking for help meant weakness, that vulnerability got you nowhere, and that the only person you could truly count on was yourself. Jung called this the abandonment archetype, and it didn't break you. It created a generation of hyper-independent survivors who can function in chaos that would destroy anyone else. But here's what nobody tells you about surviving that way. The skills that saved you as a child are now slowly killing your soul. Think back to your childhood for a moment. You were the first generation of latchkey kids on a massive scale. You let yourself into empty houses after school. You made your own meals. You did your homework alone. Your parents were there, sure, but they were dealing with their own crises. Divorces skyrocketed. Dual-income households became the norm out of necessity, not choice. The economy was shifting. The social fabric was tearing. And you were right in the middle of it, absorbing every shockwave. Jung understood that children don't just experience trauma. They internalize the entire psychological atmosphere of their era. You didn't just live through the transition from the analog world to the digital age. You absorbed the existential terror of that transition into your developing psyche. You watched the old certainties die. Church attendance dropped. Marriage stopped being forever. Career loyalty became a joke. The institutions your parents believed in crumbled right in front of you. And what did you learn from all this? You learned not to trust anything outside yourself. You learned that people leave, that promises break, that the only reliable constant in life is your own ability to survive whatever comes next. This is the abandonment archetype that Jung wrote about. When a child internalizes the message that they are fundamentally alone, something profound happens to their psychological structure. They don't become weak, they become armored. You built walls so thick that most people never see the real you. You developed independence so complete that asking for help feels like admitting defeat. You created a self-sufficient persona so convincing that even you sometimes forget it's a mask. You learned to read the room before you entered it. You developed the ability to sense danger before it arrived. You became experts at emotional self-regulation because there was nobody else to regulate you. You were 7 years old, making life decisions that should have been made by adults. You were 10 years old, managing your parents' emotions during their divorce. You were 12 years old, essentially running a household while your parents worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. This wasn't character building. This was survival. And you got so good at it that you forgot there was any other way to live. But every defense mechanism has a shadow side, and yours is massive. Here's where your generation carries a wound that nobody talks about. You don't trust institutions because you watch them all fail. Government, corrupt. Religion, hypocritical. Marriage, a coin flip. Corporations, they'll discard you the moment it's profitable. Jung would call this your collective shadow. The part of your generation's psyche that holds all the cynicism, all the distrust, all the barely suppressed rage at a world that forced you to grow up too fast and then told you that you didn't matter. You were supposed to be children. Instead, you became tiny adults, managing emotional situations that would challenge people twice your age. Your parents treated you like confidants, dumping their problems on you. Your siblings needed you to be the stable one. Your friends came to you because you seemed to have it together, and you never complained, because complaining meant you were weak. Showing pain meant you were broken. Asking for support meant you had failed at the one thing you were supposed to be good at, which was handling everything alone. Jung called this the inverted puer aeternus. Normally, the puer aeternus is the eternal child who refuses to grow up. But your generation experienced the opposite. You were forced into premature adulthood, skipping right over the developmental stages where you were supposed to learn that vulnerability is strength, that connection requires openness, and that no human being is designed to carry everything alone. So you suppressed your vulnerability. You buried your need for connection. You became the emotional shock absorbers for everyone around you, and you told yourself this made you strong. The tragedy is that it did make you strong, but it also made you invisible. Nobody sees how much you carry because you've gotten so good at carrying it silently. Nobody knows how much you've survived because you learned never to talk about it. Nobody understands the weight you hold because you've spent your entire life pretending it doesn't exist. This is the silent suffering that defines your generation. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. You hurt in ways you can't even name. You long for connection, but don't know how to build it. You want to be seen, but have no idea how to let people in. And somewhere deep inside, you're starting to realize that the survival skills that got you this far are now the very things preventing you from actually living. You've become so good at functioning that you've forgotten how to feel, so competent at managing crisis that you don't know what to do with peace, so skilled at independence that intimacy feels like a threat to your entire identity. And here's the cruel irony. The world looks at you and sees people who have it all together, stable careers, functional relationships, the ability to handle anything that comes your way. They have no idea that beneath that competent exterior is a person who has been running on empty for decades, a person who learned to perform normalcy so well that they sometimes forget it's a performance. But this gets worse before it gets better, because right now, at this exact moment in your life, you're hitting a psychological wall that Jung predicted you would hit. And most of you have no idea what's happening. Jung talked extensively about what he called the afternoon of life, the period after age 40 when the psychological tasks shift completely. In the morning of life, your job is to build a career, build a family, build a persona, build external success. You did all of that. You checked every box. You met every expectation. You proved that you could survive anything and build a life despite the chaos of your childhood. But in the afternoon of life, everything inverts. The afternoon of life is about integration, about reclaiming the parts of yourself you abandoned, about confronting the shadows you've been running from, about finding meaning instead of just accomplishing things. And your generation, you're hitting this transition right now, at a time when the entire world is falling apart around you. You spent your youth building walls to protect yourself. You spent your young adulthood proving you didn't need anyone. You spent your middle years being the stable one, the reliable one, the one everyone else could count on. And now you're waking up to a terrifying realization. The independence that saved you has become a prison. The self-sufficiency that protected you has become isolation. The emotional control that made you strong has cut you off from your own soul. Jung believed that the afternoon of life crisis isn't about doing more. It's about being more. But you don't know how to be. You only know how to do. You don't know how to feel. You only know how to function. You don't know how to connect. You only know how to survive. This is why so many of you are experiencing what feels like a complete psychological breakdown right now. You're not breaking down. You're breaking open. The survival skills that served you for 40+ years are no longer enough. Your soul is demanding something different, something deeper, something real. You're facing what Jung called the crisis of meaning versus the crisis of doing. Your entire life, you've solved problems by doing more, working harder, being more competent, building more walls. But the afternoon of life doesn't respond to doing. It demands being. It demands that you stop running long enough to feel what you've been avoiding. That you stop performing long enough to discover who you actually are beneath the competence. That you stop functioning long enough to grieve what you lost when you were forced to grow up too fast. And if you ignore this demand, you will spend the rest of your life bitter, isolated, and wondering why success feels so hollow. You'll hit 65 having accomplished everything and connected with no one, having survived everything and experienced nothing, having built a perfect life that feels completely empty because you were never actually present in it. But here's what makes your generation absolutely unique. You're not just going through a personal crisis. You're the solution to a collective one. Think about what you represent for a moment. You are the last generation that remembers life before the internet. You know what it means to be bored. You understand waiting. You remember when people actually talked to each other instead of staring at screens. You experienced real childhood, where you played outside until the streetlights came on and nobody knew where you were, and that was normal. You remember rotary phones. You remember card catalogs at libraries. You remember having to actually show up if you wanted to talk to someone. You remember what it felt like to be unreachable, and how that wasn't a bug, but a feature of human existence. But you're also the first generation that adapted to the digital world as adults. You learned computers. You navigated social media. You understand technology not as natives, but as immigrants who made the journey successfully. You weren't born with a smartphone in your hand, but you figured it out anyway. You built websites. You learned to email. You adapted to remote work. You evolved without losing your core understanding of how human beings actually function when they're not mediated by screens. This makes you something that has never existed before in human history. You are the bridge generation. You speak both languages. You understand both worlds. You can translate between the old way and the new way in a manner that nobody else can. The boomers don't understand the digital world. They're immigrants who never quite learned the language. They use technology, but they don't think in it. They adapted out of necessity, not natural fluency. The millennials and Gen Z don't understand the analog world. They're natives of a country that didn't exist when you were born. They've never known a world without instant communication, without constant connectivity, without the digital mediation of every human experience. They can't imagine life before Google, before smartphones, before social media became the primary mode of human connection. But you're bilingual. You can code switch between tradition and innovation, between patience and speed, between depth and efficiency, between analog connection and digital communication. You remember what it was like to wait for a letter, and you can send a text message. You understand the value of face-to-face conversation, and you can run a Zoom meeting. You know what deep focus feels like, and you can multitask across digital platforms. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psychological ability to hold opposites in tension without collapsing into one side or the other, the capacity to reconcile contradictions instead of choosing between them. And this isn't just a nice skill to have. This is your soul's purpose. This is why you were forged in abandonment, why you were forced to become independent, why you learned to survive in the gap between worlds. You weren't being punished. You were being prepared. The world is breaking right now along the exact fault lines that you were designed to bridge. The old systems are dying, but the new systems don't work yet. The traditional ways have failed, but the modern alternatives are causing different problems. Democracy is struggling, capitalism is breaking, social cohesion is disintegrating, mental health is collapsing, the environment is dying, and every proposed solution seems to create new problems. We're caught between a past that no longer functions and a future that hasn't arrived yet, and everyone is choosing sides. The older generations want to go back to how things were. The younger generations want to burn it all down and start over. Both sides are screaming at each other. Both sides are convinced they're right. Both sides are missing the point, because the answer isn't going backward, and it isn't going forward without wisdom. The answer is integration. Synthesis. Taking what was valuable from the old world and combining it with what's necessary from the new world. Except you. You see both sides. You understand why the old ways mattered and why they had to die. You recognize why the new ways are necessary and why they're not sufficient. You can hold the tension between preservation and progress without losing your mind. This is your transcendent function activating, and the world desperately needs you to stop hiding it. You understand why tradition matters without being enslaved to it. You appreciate innovation without worshipping it. You can see that both the conservatives and the progressives have part of the truth, and both are missing crucial elements. You're not interested in ideological purity. You're interested in what actually works, in what actually helps human beings flourish, in what actually creates sustainable systems. But you won't step into this role if you don't integrate what's happening to you right now, because there are two paths in front of you, and only one leads to your actual purpose. Here's where the stakes get real. You're at a fork in the road, and the choice you make in the next few years will determine whether you become bitter or whether you become necessary. Path 1 is the path of the Senex. In Jungian psychology, the Senex is the negative elder, the rigid old person who resents the young, who says things were better in my day, who refuses to adapt, who becomes increasingly bitter as the world moves on without them. If you don't do the integration work now, if you don't confront the walls you've built, if you don't reclaim the vulnerability you've suppressed, you will become this. You'll become the person who complains that nobody understands hard work anymore, that everyone is too sensitive, that the world has gone to hell. You'll become rigid where you used to be flexible, judgmental where you used to be open, resentful where you used to be resilient. And the worst part? You'll be completely justified in your bitterness, because you have been overlooked. Your contributions have been ignored. Your generation has been consistently written out of the narrative. When people talk about generational conflict, they talk about boomers versus millennials, as if you don't exist, as if the generation that actually bridged those two worlds is invisible. You've been erased from the cultural conversation, despite being the hinge upon which everything turned. But justification doesn't make it any less toxic. Being right about being wronged doesn't make bitterness any less corrosive to your soul. You can be completely correct about the injustice you've experienced and still destroy yourself with resentment. That's the trap of the Senex. Righteousness that curdles into rigidity. Justified anger that hardens into perpetual bitterness. Path 2 is the path of the sage, the integrated elder who has transmuted their wounds into wisdom, who uses their hard-won independence not to isolate, but to stabilize others, who takes their ability to survive anything and transforms it into the capacity to guide others through their own chaos. This is the path where your invisibility becomes your superpower. Because you've been invisible your whole life, you don't need the spotlight, you don't need recognition, you don't perform for applause. This makes you trustworthy in a way that people who grew up on social media can never be. You know how to do the real work without posting about it. You understand that the most important contributions are often the ones nobody sees. You can hold space for others without making it about yourself. This is what the world needs right now. Not more voices screaming for attention, but steady presence, quiet competence, integrated wisdom, the ability to bridge gaps without needing credit for it, the capacity to hold space for transformation without controlling the outcome, the willingness to serve without requiring validation. But you can't give what you haven't claimed. You can't bridge from disconnection. You can't guide from bitterness. The afternoon of life is calling you to do the hardest work you've ever done, not building more, but dismantling what no longer serves you, not accomplishing more, but integrating what you've never processed, not proving more, but becoming more real. This means letting the walls come down. It means admitting you need connection. It means acknowledging the pain you've been carrying in silence for decades. It means asking for help, which will feel like the most unnatural thing you've ever done. It means being vulnerable, which your entire survival system will resist with everything it has. It means crying for the childhood you never got to have, grieving for the connection you never learned to build, feeling the loneliness you've been outrunning since you were 7 years old. Your inner child, that latchkey kid who came home to an empty house every day, is still waiting for someone to notice. Still hoping someone will ask if they're okay. Still carrying the weight of responsibilities that should never have been theirs. And that child needs you to finally turn around and see them, to acknowledge what they survived, to grieve what they lost, to integrate their pain instead of continuing to run from it. But on the other side of this integration is your actual life, not the performance of life, not the functional version of life, but the real, messy, connected, meaningful life that you've been too armored to experience. The life where you can actually feel joy instead of just recognizing it intellectually. Where you can build intimacy instead of just performing relationship. Where you can rest instead of just collapsing from exhaustion. Your invisibility wasn't punishment. It was gestation. You were being hidden for a reason. You were being prepared in the darkness so that you could emerge now when the world is breaking with exactly the skills required to help put it back together. But not the old version, and not the chaotic new version. A third way, a bridge, a synthesis of what was valuable in tradition and what's necessary in innovation. You are the generation that can hold the center while everyone else is flying toward the extremes. You are the stabilizers, the translators, the ones who remember that most truth exists in the tension between opposites, not in choosing one side and destroying the other. You've spent your entire life in the space between worlds, between childhood and adulthood too early, between analog and digital, between tradition and innovation, between independence and connection. This is your soul task. This is why you were born when you were born. This is why you survived what you survived. Not to stay invisible, but to emerge now, when you're most needed, with the hard-won wisdom that only comes from living in the gap between worlds. The world doesn't need you to choose a side. It needs you to build bridges, to translate between languages, to hold space for integration instead of division. But you have to choose it. You have to do the integration work. You have to reclaim your vulnerability without losing your strength. You have to open your heart without abandoning your boundaries. You have to ask for the connection you need while maintaining the independence you've earned. You have to become the bridge by first bridging the gap within yourself, between the competent adult you've built and the wounded child you've been carrying, between the independent survivor and the human being who needs connection, between the person who can handle everything and the soul who is tired of having to. This is the afternoon of life. This is your moment, not to prove anything, but to become who you actually are beneath all the armor. The world is breaking, and you are exactly what's needed to help bridge the gap between what was and what's coming next. Not by having all the answers, but by being willing to hold the questions, by standing in the tension between opposites without collapsing, by demonstrating that integration is possible even when it seems impossible. If you recognize yourself in this, If you feel the weight of this truth settling into your bones, comment below. I am the bridge. Let yourself be seen by others walking the same path. If this resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more insights into the psychological truths that explain why you've always felt different. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.